Hello, welcome back to another video. My name is Gemma and today I'm going to be wrapping up all of the books that I read in May. So I actually had quite a bumper reading month last month. I read 18 books and DNF'd 2. I did read quite a few graphic novels because I'd got them out from the library and they were expiring and I was like, but that is a tangent. But yeah, 18 books to talk to you about. So I am going to try and whiz through them. I say that every month and yet this will probably still be a half an hour video at least. So apologies, there will be timestamps as always. So feel free to just jump to wherever is most interesting to you. But obviously if you want to give me watch hours, then watch the lot. So before I go into a wrap up of the books, just a quick check-in on goals. So I have 2 list goals. The first is to read 12 books that were recommended on sort of the best of lists by 12 of my favourite booktubers last year. So I have read 1 more of those in May. So I have now read 4 out of 12, which means that yes, I am still 1 behind, but you know, it's not awful, is it? But I read A Pinch of Magic, which takes me up to 4 out of 12, and that was recommended by the lovely Jack at Spread Bookjoy. We will get on to my thoughts about that middle grade when we get to that point in the video. I also have my bucket list books. So I have a big scratch list of 100 books you must read before you die, and I am slowly working my way through them. I pick 10 each year to try and get through. I also ticked 1 off of there, The Colour Purple, so I've now read 4 out of 10 of my sort of pre-selected ones from there. My other goal is to read more books by non-UK, non-US authors than by UK and US authors, and so that goal is still not going great. So in May I read 28% of books by British authors, 44% by American authors. I really feel like I need to be more selective about the American authors that I pick up. I think they are just very easy to pick up because they're everywhere, and I really probably at this point need to start honing in a bit. I think probably prizes hasn't helped too much, but yeah, I need to focus in on that a bit more. Which means 28% was non-UK and non-US, quite far off my 50% goal. Overall, for the whole year, I have read 29% non-UK, non-US, so overall I'm doing slightly better, but not much, 1%. So 1 to work on. So as always, I'm going to work from my least favourite to my most favourite, and because we effectively have 20, if we include my 2 DNFs, I'm going to try and be quick. So in 20th position for the month of May, we have The Dog of the North by Elizabeth McKenzie. This was a long-listed book for the Women's Prize for Fiction. I picked this up, started listening to the audio. I didn't get super far into it, probably only an hour or so, and I just thought it was okay. It was a bit weird, but I just didn't care. And the only reason I had picked it up is because it was long-listed for the Women's Prize. It wasn't that it was a book that really called out to me. I certainly wouldn't have picked it up off the shelf had it not been long-listed, and so I just made the decision, especially after finding out that it wasn't shortlisted, to just sack it off. So I can't really give an opinion on that because I didn't read enough of it. Then in 19th, my second DNF of the month, we have They're Going to Love You by Meg Howrey. This was one that I predicted as being a potential for the Women's Prize long list, and it wasn't nominated. Not super disappointed by that, given that I have DNF'd it. But again, this was a book that I think it was fine. It probably, if I'd have carried on, would have been a 3-star read. We're following a girl whose mother is a dancer and her father is a gay man who sort of experienced the HIV epidemic in the 80s, and we sort of like not even there was it was sort of jumpy around the timelines, and like between her childhood and then her adulthood, and it was just a bit jumpy for me, and I again didn't really feel connected to the main character. It just felt very, very okay. So let me know if anyone's finished that book and has different thoughts. I just wasn't in the mood for it. You know, when you're just not in the mood for average? That's how I felt. Then in 18th position, we have a poetry collection. So I have read poetry every month this year. That was unintentional at the beginning of the year, but I think it's something I'm going to continue. And then maybe I'll do a video towards the end of the year about my year of experiencing poetry. On the back of having a very good experience in January, but this clearly wasn't an awesome experience for me. So I read Pillow Thoughts by Courtney Peppernell, who is an Australian author, and yeah, I feel really bad because this was recommended by the lovely Becky at Teacup the Storyteller. I absolutely love her channel, and I wanted to pick this up because I know how much she's loved this series of poetry, because there are several in the collection. For me though, it was just a bit too lovey-dovey and emotional, which makes me sound like a really heartless bitch, and I suppose I am that. So this just didn't resonate with me. I think it's also looking at a young woman in her sort of early 20s experiencing love and all the tumult of that, and then putting it into her poems. So every heartbreak feels like the world is ending, and every new love is like the start of your forever, and it was just a bit much. It was a bit too much for me. And this again goes back to just being quite cynical. Having been with my husband for 15 years, I'm well out of that phase of my life, and I'm not really interested in revisiting it in any way, shape or form. So so that one unfortunately did not work for me. In 17th position, we have The Phantom Tollbooth by Norton Juster, which I buddy read with my lovely friend Alice from Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. And yeah, so we're in 2.5 star territory. I gave Pillow Thoughts and this one 2.5 stars. This actually started off quite positively. The first 2 or 3 chapters I was quite interested. We're following a boy who comes home, there is a note and a toll booth in his bedroom, and he goes through to this magical world and sets off an adventure. All of that setup I thought was fab. The problem came after that, where almost every chapter felt like a short story. You'd meet characters and then they were gone. There were a few characters that carried on throughout the novel, creating some consistency, but it was sort of Alice in Wonderland vibes with the just bizarre, but probably not as well done. And I didn't like Alice in Wonderland, so don't kick me off BookTube for that. And it just got quite repetitive and dull. There were some really interesting things in here, but I felt like none of them were explored to a level that I would have wanted them to be explored. And then the overall sort of like quest adventure was just wrapped up really, really quickly in one chapter. And it was like the one thing that we've been working towards, that we've been going through all of these almost short story like chapters for, and it was just like over and done. And yeah, it just didn't work for me. So 2.5 stars, definitely not my jam. Now we're going to move into 3.5 star territory, and in 16th position for the month we have The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nghi. This is a fantasy novella based sort of on Chinese history and mythology. It's super short, and it's the first in a series of 3 to date, with a 4th coming out later this year. And I thought this was fine. It sort of follows the handmaiden of the Empress and her sort of, I'll be honest, I listened to it a couple of weeks ago and I've pretty much forgotten everything that happened. It's got very good language, very good writing in it, but I just felt like I wasn't really connecting to the story. I am going to try and read the second one and see how I get on. But yeah, it was fine. It was 3.5 stars, so it was slightly better than average, but yeah, we'll see. Then in 15th position we have Black Butterflies by Proscilla Morris. Again, this is a women's prize book. This has been longlisted and shortlisted, and I didn't dislike this book. Obviously it's ranking quite low in the month of May, which actually is more a testament to the other books that I've read rather than a reflection of this one. But it follows a woman during the siege of Sarajevo. Her family go over to England. She decides to stay for a bit longer and ends up being trapped in Sarajevo. I thought the depiction of war was really, really good. You really felt for it. You can also see the slow decline into war, how everything's fine, and then one day, you know, there's more soldiers on the streets, and then the next day this happens, and the next day this happens, and somehow you get to the end of a year and you're living with no heating, no water, and it's sort of all of these things that have just escalated to the point where you don't even recognise yourself. And I think that was really, really well done. There was a lot of reference to art in this. The main character was an artist. I didn't really care for that at all. I am not generally interested in art, just personal preference. So I wasn't really interested in any of those sections. Though the relation of the title Black Butterflies I did think was really, really quite powerful. But overall, and this is going to sound awful, but I've read better books about war. This war in particular, I think if you are looking for a story about the Balkans and what happened and the impact of that on people, I would say S by Slavenka Drakulic is a better book, personally. So yeah, I thought it was fine. Didn't blow my socks off, and I do think that this got the place in the shortlist that possibly other books should have got. I definitely rated other books higher than this one, so yeah. Then number 14, we have The Mysterious Affair at Styles by Agatha Christie. So this I am reading as part of my Agatha and Alice challenge. This was supposed to be the book for March. I only finished it in May, but this was another solid entry by Christie. I would say this is probably my least favourite of the ones that I've read so far. I've read The Death on the Nile and Taken at the Flood. I think this one is her debut, so I think maybe that showed through a little bit. It felt a little bit more formulaic. There was less sort of secondary mysteries, which is what I really loved, particularly about The Death on the Nile. So yeah, I enjoyed it, but I wouldn't say it was my favourite that I've read by Christie. In 13th position, and we are still in 3.5 star territory, we have Katherine Parr, The Sixth Wife by Alison Weir, which was the last book in the Six Tudor Queens series, and me and my lovely friend Emily at Naval Novels have been doing the Tudor along for the last year, and it was our last book. So I was actually quite pleased to be finished with Tudors for a while. I feel a bit Tudored out, but I thought this was a good book. It was definitely one of the books I preferred from the series. I think possibly because Katherine Parr is a queen that I knew very little about, and also I felt like we got quite a lot of interesting information about after the death of Henry VIII, which I thought was really interesting. I also think she included a lot more of the religious conflicts within this book, which was a criticism of earlier books. I didn't think that was very clear or well done in previous books, but I think it was ramped up a level in this. But Emily and I did a live show, which I will link below. There are spoilers in that, so if you haven't read it, then probably don't watch that. But if you are interested in more of our thoughts, I will link that below for you to go and check out. In at number 12, and we are now into 4-star territory. So yeah, 12 books that were 4-star or above in May is pretty good. And this was a random one. This was one of my graphic novels from the library that had to go back, so I don't have it anymore. But it was The Witch Boy by Molly Knox Ostertag. And I really, really loved this book. And fun fact, Ostertag is actually married to N.D. Stevenson, who was the author of Nimona. So just a little fun fact for you. But this was really lovely, really cozy vibes, sort of YA, sort of maybe middle grade to YA demographic, and we follow a young boy who is raised in this sort of community, this almost secret community. Well, it is a secret community where the girls become witches and the boys become shapeshifters. And he has this affinity to witchcraft that he is not really allowed to explore. And we sort of look at gender norms and gender stereotypes and the damage that that can do, all wrapped up in this beautiful fantasy, heartwarming story. So I really enjoyed it. The artwork was lovely, and there are 2 more in this series which I have ordered from the library, so obviously enjoyed it enough to continue, and I would recommend if you just want a bit of a cozy hug of an afternoon. Next we have another graphic novel, and this one by my fave, Tillie Walden. I read Spinning, which is her autobiography of her life growing up as an ice skater, a figure skater. And it was just really interesting because I know nothing about ice skating. It's not really a big thing here in the UK. I mean, the nearest ice rink to me is about an hour and a half, 2 hours away, and it's just not really a thing for me in my area. So I found that really interesting, her getting up at stupid o'clock in the morning every day to go to the rink, and the fact that she wasn't super invested in that, but she kind of felt like she had to, and also her struggles coming to terms with her sexuality right from a very young age up until sort of her late teens. This obviously also supported Tillie Walden's beautiful art style, which I've talked about many times on my channel and I absolutely adore. So I thought this was a solid offering from her, and yeah, I really enjoyed it and would recommend it if someone's looking for sort of a coming of age autobiography. I thought it was good. Next up, in 10th position, we have The Hole by Pyun Hye-Young, and this was a very short novel. This was one that I picked for several readathons in May, sorry. And I was not entirely sure I was going to enjoy it. The premise sounded quite odd. A guy is in a car crash, goes over his mother-in-law, and she's digging a hole in the garden. It's basically what the synopsis is, and I was like, okay. But I think it was really interesting. So, as I said, we do follow a guy who's in a car crash. His wife dies, he survives, but he is paralysed. And he ends up going back to his mother-in-law's, who takes care of him. But it really does look at disability, the way people with disabilities are treated, their lack of options. We are in this guy's head for the entirety of this novel because he is unable to speak. And I just really enjoyed it. I thought it was really good. Quite weird, spooky in places, and yeah, it was good. Next up we have The Colour Purple by Alice Walker, which I read with the lovely Jennifer Loves Books and Jacket Spread Bookjoy. I'm not going to talk about this book at all, however, because Alice Walker has been pretty hateful recently with regards to showing herself as a TERF and an anti-Semite, so I'm not going to give her book any airtime today. In 8th position we have Memphis by Tara M. Stringfellow, and this again was longlisted for the Women's Prize. Is there a theme? And I thought this was a good book. This was very Gemma Catnippy, historical fiction, multi-generational, looking at generational trauma, looking at the strength of women, black women in particular, and I thought it did all of those things really well, particularly highlighting the strength of black women and the way that they have to overcome very different struggles even to black men. There was a lot of trauma in this, very trauma heavy, but I thought it was really well done. Tara M. Stringfellow, unfortunately, is another author that I'm not overly impressed with. She was quite rude to some reviewers, so that is a shame, because actually I think this is quite an important book, quite a powerful book, similarly to The Colour Purple, but it's a shame that these authors can't just be a bit more polite and less hateful. So I'm going to leave my comments on that there. Yeah, 4 stars. So next, in 7th position, we have I'm Glad My Mum Died by Jeanette McCurdy. So I basically had FOMO. I felt like everybody had read this book. I know I saw Jack at Spread Bookjoy review this. Sandy at Miss Reads a Lot was talking about it. Scott at Gunpowder Fiction Plot reviewed it way back when it was first released. And so I felt like I was missing out. So I picked up the audio and I very much enjoyed it. This is a memoir from McCurdy about her life growing up with a mother who was abusive, though she didn't really understand the level of that abuse until she was in adulthood. it is also looking at the exploitative way that TV production studios treat particularly their young actors. In this case, she was having a particular dig at Nickelodeon. I never watched iCarly, I'm too old for that, but I would say you don't have to have watched any of her stuff to really be able to sympathise with her. It really is just about her journey as an actress, what led her to that, what kept her in it, what the problems were, and you really don't need to know anything about her background, and that is a really compelling story. She talks a lot about the pressures put on her both by her mother and by the TV people, and I just thought it was really well done. She narrated it herself, and I thought she was good at narrating, if a little detached, which I expect you probably would be if you're reading your own memoir. I would recommend. I thought it was a good read. And now we are moving into 4.5-star books. So number 6, we have A Pinch of Magic by Michelle Harrison, which I obviously mentioned earlier as one of the books recommended by Jack last year. I think she actually recommended one later in the series, but obviously I needed to start with the first one. And I was so delighted. I listened to this on audio and it was just so much fun. We follow 3 sisters who inherit a magical item each, but along with that they find that there is a curse upon their family, and then we follow them as they try to work out where this curse came from and is there a way to break it. And it was just a good old-fashioned adventure story with a pinch of magic and just lovely sister dynamics throughout. I really highly recommend this if you enjoy middle grade or middle grade fantasy. It really is such a great book, and it's one that I wish I had available to me as a child, because I would have absolutely annihilated this series. I probably still will as an adult, don't get me wrong, but yeah, what a beautiful book for children. So thank you very much, Jack, for the recommendation. That was a win. In 5th place we have another graphic novel. This one actually rolled over from my Trans Girl April, so I wanted to read, and that is Gender Queer by Maya Kababe. Apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrong. And this follows Maya's life from childhood right up through to adulthood, when are a teacher. So I'm going to start with that point. So pronouns are discussed in this, and Maya brought up a set of pronouns that I had never come across. I can't actually remember the terminology for them, but it's EAM instead of they or she or he. So that's quite different to anything that I've come across. So I'm going to just say now, I'm going to try and use those pronouns, but I do apologise if I slip at any point, because they are quite foreign to me. So I will try my best. But this was beautifully illustrated and narrated throughout. I really like the way that a sort of flashback, so you could, similarly to if anyone's read Welcome to St. Hell, you sort of see looking back at their life and at their struggles and trying to sort of unpick them as an adult, and you also see, even as an adult, as a teacher, that they are still struggling to work out how to not present themselves, but how to discuss it with different demographics of people. So it may be easier to talk to family, but then how do you talk to students? How do you talk to your teachers? How do you talk to peers at work? So all of those things were discussed, and I just thought it was really fantastic. It definitely opened my eyes to a different side of sort of the gender spectrum that I am very unfamiliar with. So if you also are quite unfamiliar with sort of non-binary and the different definitions within what is gender queer, then I would really recommend this as a good starting place, and it has made me want to delve a bit deeper and understand a bit more, because it was quite a lot of new information for me. So really like that book. In at fourth place, we have Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy, which was the Greek book for Misery May that I hosted with my lovely friend Scott from Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. And we had a fabulous group over on Voxer discussing this book as we went through. We took the month to read it, though I think quite a few people sped through the second half. And I just loved it. I love Thomas Hardy. He's so accessible as a Victorian author. It's I feel like he's spoiled me a little bit because I've now moved into a George Eliot book and it's a lot more waffly. Hardy, I just feel, is so much more accessible than the likes of Eliot or Dickens. My personal opinion, but Jude the Obscure did not let me down. It was significantly miserable, particularly in the second half, last third of the book. But I just love his writing style. We follow Jude throughout his life as he tries to better himself in a world that is ultimately pitted against him, both from a religious standpoint and from a social class standpoint. The supporting characters of Sue and forgotten the other lady's name, but they were really, really interesting as well. And I guess this quite often happens, but if I read this in a group, like the group that we had on Voxer, you get so many opinions and so much discussion that it really elevates the book for me. So had I read this on my own, maybe it would have only been 4 stars, but it was 4.5 because of all the amazing conversation. So thank you very much to those that were involved in that. You know who you are. It was an absolute delight, and thank you so much for participating. Okay, and then we have 3 5-star books to finish off, and it was very hard to rank these, particularly the ones in the top 2 spots. So in third position we have Half a World Away by Mike Gale. This is not my usual jam. This is a contemporary. It looks at a brother and sister who were separated by Child Protective Services when they were younger, and we find them in adulthood as they reconnect. The younger brother has no recollection of his sort of home life and his sister, but the sister was older and she very much misses her brother and wants to re-establish that connection. And it was just heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. There was a point about the middle of the book where a significant plot point happened. Obviously I won't discuss because spoilers, but I was devastated and the last sort of 50-75 pages of the book I was just in like uncontrollable tears in the car on the way back from Pembrokeshire. So yeah, any book that can make me sob like that is an automatic 5-star. And I have read Mike Gale before and he has made me cry before, so he is on a roll. So I definitely will be revisiting more of Mike Gale's work because he is a fantastic author. In at number 2 we have another book that made me cry, Wandering Souls by Cecile Pin. This was longlisted for the Women's Prize. I have got a solo review of this coming, so I'm not going to go into super loads of detail here, but this follows a family fleeing Vietnam just after the war and looking to resettle somewhere. There is a lot of tragedy in this book, and we follow the eldest sister's view throughout this and all of the pressures that are on her and what it's like to come into Thatcherite Britain and deal with that. And I mean, a lot of people have reviewed this book, so there are a lot of parallels back to life now, and there are some smatterings of that within the book, and I just thought it was just magnificent. And like I say, there were points that made me cry, and it was a very, very short book that packed a punch. Every word was there for a reason, and I think Cecile Pin is an extraordinary author, and I can't wait to see what she comes up with next. Okay, and that leaves number 1 spot, and if you follow me regularly then you will have already seen a review for this. If you don't, you can click subscribe and the like button and that'd be fabulous. But Chain Gang All Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei Brenya. This was amazing. So again, I'm not going to go into loads of detail because I have a solo review which I will link at the end of the video, but this is a dystopian with gladiator vibes, very feminist, queer, and I adored it. This book takes real like chunks out of the US penal system, and I'm there for it. And it also asks consumers of media to be held more accountable, and I thought that was very important too. But like I say, I talk about all of the points in more detail in that solo review video, so I will leave that here. Please tell me what your best books of May were, and I will be back very soon with another one. Bye guys.